All right, here we go. So, welcome back to another episode of Sober Yoga Girl. I am super excited for this particular episode because I have a guest who I have known for a very long time. Sophie Mallowan is a childhood summer camp friend of mine, and we must have met maybe at like age 10 or something. Known each other for years. And Sophie is another yoga teacher. She is Canadian based. She works for Modo Yoga International, which back when I lived in Canada used to be known as Moksha. And now it's Modo. And she also does some private one-on-one work in yoga teacher mentorship and working one-on-one private yoga sessions. So welcome, Sophie.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And I just want to say it's been so cool just to watch you grow and evolve literally over the last 20 years, which is so wild. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. And you too. It's been cool to see like our parallel yoga journeys because you were out in Halifax when I was in Kingston. Mm-hmm. And then it was interesting because then you came to Kingston and then I was gone to Kuwait, but we were both kind of like exploring and finding our own sort of pathways within yoga at the same time, which is
so amazing. We have lots of overlap from the Kingston yoga community, from summer camp, and just like the yoga community in general. So yeah, it's so sweet.
Awesome. So Sophie this week is a bit of a unique guest in that all of the episodes thus far have been about sobriety in terms of alcohol. And what I'm really excited about having Sophie on is that it's a different perspective because Sophie was smoking weed. Is that the word we use for it? Weed, pot?
Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting. I want to share this. I made a post using the word marijuana, and I actually didn't know. A friend of mine reached out and explained that there's like some racial undertones to the word marijuana and the way that it was used in particular in the war on drugs. So really trying to stay away from using the word marijuana and instead using the word cannabis or pot or whatever floats your boat, really. Those will be the main terms that I use today.
I saw that post actually, which is why I was like, I just want to make sure I'm using the right word.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I've noticed a switch to the term cannabis, and I wasn't sure if that was maybe in the process of the legalization or I don't know.
I would need to do more research on it, but it was essentially the word marijuana was used as propaganda against pretty much Black and brown people who were using or selling pot at the time.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, before we kind of get into all that, I was wondering if you could start us off with a bit of a intro into just kind of telling us about yourself and your life and your journey and kind of where you are today.
Cool, for sure. So, as Alex mentioned, I went to summer camp my whole life growing up, as did Alex. So that's how we connected. I am from Canada. So I was born in Burlington, Ontario, but grew up like mainly in Barrie, Ontario, which are two cities just outside of Toronto, Ontario. So if you're not familiar with Burlington or Barrie, not far from Toronto. Yeah. I'll get into more of my story as it pertains to high school. But after high school, I went away to university. I went out east to Dalhousie, which is in Halifax. I mean, that's such a potent time for so many people. For many people, it's the first time that they're leaving their parents' home. They're going out to live on their own. Perhaps there's not as much supervision. And for me, that really was a challenging time, those 4 or 5 years living in Halifax. And as challenging as it was, that was also the time where I started to see the most personal growth and development. And luckily, I also found yoga while I was at university. So every year you kind of get like an agenda at university, and at the back of the agenda, there was a 1-week free pass to go to this hot yoga studio, which was then called Moksha and is now called Modo Yoga Halifax. And so I went with a girlfriend, and I grew up dancing and always loving being in my body, being embodied. And, it really was like a love at first sight kind of thing for me. Modo yoga is a hot yoga, and I love the heat. So just the mixture of being in my body, being in the heat, it really felt like coming back home. And that's not to say that I went like, full yogi right away. It was a many year journey that was actually really interlaced with my journey towards getting free from smoking. So I'll get more into that in a moment, but pretty much right after I graduated university, I went and did my yoga teacher training. And from there, started teaching. And anybody who has been teaching yoga knows that it can be quite the hustle to try to make ends meet when you're just teaching group public yoga classes, which is what I was doing at the time. So I was working what felt like, a million different jobs just to pay my bills. And it just became pretty clear that it wasn't going to work. Like I wasn't going to be able to support myself. So I ended up moving back home with my parents, and I got a job at a local library, which was amazing. And I really loved working there. And between working there and teaching yoga, I was able to save some money and do some travel. So I went to India twice. I went to Indonesia with one of our really good friends, Leah. That was just such an amazing opportunity for me to learn more about yoga from the birthplace of yoga and Hinduism. So that was amazing. But I found myself, coming back home, kind of like back at ground zero again, struggling to make ends meet. My contract with the library had come to a close, and I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to make this work? Like, it had been at this point, I guess, maybe 4 years of me teaching, and I hadn't found a way to make it click yet. And, I was feeling some pressure from my parents and from the world just to go back to school and to get a job. So that's what I did. I ended up going back to college and studied to be a paralegal, which seems like kind of like a diversion from teaching yoga, but I had always been interested in law. And I really enjoyed studying it. I really, really did. I had some amazing friends. It was really stimulating, really challenging for me. But after about 6 months in the workforce, I kind of just knew that this kind of work wasn't going to bring me lasting joy and happiness. And once I made that realization, once it clicked for me, it's like I couldn't get it out of my head. I would show up to work every single day, even though I was still teaching yoga at the time. The yoga studio was actually right below the law firm that I was working at. I felt like in a way I was betraying myself and also my potential. And just because I couldn't make it work before doesn't mean that I couldn't make it work going forward. And, I got lucky. I got really lucky, and a job opportunity opened up with Moto Yoga. And, I saw it pop up on my lunch break when I was working at the law firm, and I went to the HR person. I was just like, I have to go home. I'm not feeling well. And I just took the next few days off of work and really put all my effort into this job application, and ended up getting the job, which was just so amazing. And I don't think that I would have been able to land the job if I was still really in the grips of my addiction and my addictive behaviors. So that was about 2 years ago that I landed this job, and opened up so many opportunities for me, which I'm just so grateful for. And then in the last year with the COVID pandemic, really I've gone and I've shifted my offerings, which were more group public, outward facing, being involved with teacher trainings, and now just working more one-on-one with people. So I'm really interested in doing more therapeutic based yoga. And as Alex mentioned, I do mentorships with students and teachers. So just really getting into the nitty gritty of what's going on. And, it's my belief that our physical bodies hold the imprint of everything that we go through in our lives, be it emotional, physical, spiritual. Our bodies hold the imprint of all of that. And I think that yoga is such a wonderful way to release some of that tension that we hold. And, for many people who might be listening, the tension that addiction and addictive patterns can cause in our body, it's a real stress. So the practice has been paramount for me in my own healing. And I've seen it, be so beneficial for other people in their own healing. And I just feel so grateful to be able to be that person to facilitate that for other people now. So that's kind of like a Coles Notes version of how I got to where I am today in this moment. But obviously so much has happened in between, and I'm really looking forward to sharing more, especially about my journey with pot and cannabis with you today.
Wow. Okay. I loved listening to that.
Thank you.
Because I feel like even like we were close as kids, as summer camp cabin mates, but I feel like as an adult, I have not actually sat down with you and like heard your journey.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like as I'm listening to it, I draw so many parallels. It sounds like you just almost had this like innate thing within you, like almost like this inner knowing that like yoga was your, I don't know if you would call it your dharma. I say that yoga was my dharma. And I just feel like you went through a similar path with that. And then also just like the grip with cannabis. I almost called it marijuana with cannabis. It just sounds like it's been parallel with my journey with alcohol too. So
yeah. And you know what I'll say about that is that for me, smoking kept me in my low self-worth behavior, right?
Yeah.
It was this way that I almost punished myself. And in order for me to step into this like high self-worth person to be like, wait, I actually deserve to have a career that I love.
Yeah.
And I can make a living doing this, even if it's extremely difficult. But I couldn't do that as long as I was getting up every morning and getting high, because there was no space for it. And I subconsciously was telling myself, no, I'm worthy of these low self-worth behaviors, right? And every morning when I wake up and I don't smoke or I don't drink or I don't do something that like limits me, I'm saying, yes, like I do deserve those higher, greater opportunities. And I'm acting in a way that's in line with that. And that's really, it's really important, especially as yoga teachers, because we're like the role models for the students. So like you need to be really aligned and really integrated in your truth. And if you're not, that translates, you know, even subconsciously that translates. So yeah, being a yoga teacher is like my greatest challenge, but also my greatest privilege, because it means I have to wake up every day and walk the talk and not just talk the talk. And that's the hard stuff, as you know.
Yeah, love that. Okay, so tell me more about your journey smoking cannabis. Like, when did you start, and kind of what aspects of the culture you were around in Canada influenced that?
Yeah, for sure. So the first time that I ever smoked was grade 8 graduation. And, you know, looking back, I just think like, wow, I was so young, right? I was so young. And it didn't really become more common until high school, which is quite common for most people. And in high school, it was very social. Like I would do it with friends at parties or with my girlfriends. We would kind of just like sneak out and go and smoke. And it was like an act of rebellion, you know. I'm the youngest child, also a Leo in astrology. So just like fiercely independent, rebellious, like kind of rejects authority for better or for worse. And so I found myself, you know, doing a lot of those things, smoking, drinking at a young age, which again, it was common, especially in my friend group. And I think in Canada in general, right? Like if we think back before pot was legalized in Canada, which was in 2018, it's like anytime you were watching a story or like a television show or a movie and pot was in it, it's like pot was either coming from California or Canada, right? Like there was just kind of this idea that Canada is a little bit more like hippie granola, which is true in some places, especially out west. Maybe not so much actually in Ontario, but weed is a really big part of the culture here, even before it was legalized, even if it was like a little bit more, let's call it underground. So for me, the issue with pot didn't really start until I moved away from home. And, you know, I had more freedom, which meant more room for exploration. And also, like, I was really lucky, really privileged growing up that I had it pretty easy. Like in high school, I had an amazing group of friends. I had the support of all of the women from summer camp. And I felt like I had a really safe container of support to navigate the things that I was going through. And then when I moved out east for university, I moved away from so many of my friends. Like I knew 2 people when I moved out there. And part of what bonded us was that we came from the same high school and we kind of had these same patterns. Like we would all go out and drink and smoke to be social. So that was the pattern that we took on as a group. And therefore that was the kind of people that we attracted when we were meeting new people in university. And so for the first year, like I would smoke on my own, but I would say it was still more, let's call it in control, even if some of the behavior was a little bit problematic. And then in second year, I started dating a new guy. And looking back, the relationship just had bad news written all over it. He also dealt pot, which made it really convenient for me to smoke pot. And, I went through a really tough time in my second year of university, and I essentially severed connections with my best friend and my roommate and also my boyfriend who was living with us at the time. And it really was a heartbreaking and deeply traumatic experience for me. And I didn't have the tools to cope with it. I didn't have any tools to how to handle these really big feelings that were coming up for me for the first time. A lot of people are familiar with like feeling really low and depressed and feeling really anxious. And for me, I was feeling those things for the first time and I felt really alone. And so I found a lot of comfort in smoking. And when I was high, I was numb. So I didn't have to feel the things that I was feeling. And so it became my way to cope. And I think that's really common. And that's something that I really want to highlight. Like, I really do believe that addiction is the result of unprocessed trauma, right? Like addiction isn't necessarily the problem. It's the reaction to the problem. And the actual problem, the root of the issue is the trauma, right? I was talking to my boyfriend about this earlier. It's like happy people don't do heroin, right? People who do heroin who are addicted to heroin, I should say, often have some really deep wounding. And I think the same is for any substance. Anybody who drinks heavily, smokes heavily, does any drug heavily. It's like the drug isn't the problem. It's a coping mechanism. And it's a really good coping mechanism at first because it's like, I don't have the tools to feel this really big thing. So I'm going to cope by using this substance. And that works until it doesn't work anymore, until your addiction and the substance overtakes your life. And that's what happened to me. I wouldn't go anywhere where I couldn't smoke. And like, you have to keep in mind, this is before pot was legal. So it's not like I could just go out with my friends and then go down the store or go down to the store to pick up a joint. Like you had to think about where you were going to get it. So I wouldn't go anywhere I couldn't smoke. I couldn't sleep without smoking. I couldn't eat without smoking. I wouldn't go to class without smoking. I wouldn't go to work without smoking. If I woke up in the middle of the night, I would need to smoke to go back to sleep. And so what started as this, like, maybe let's call it healthy coping mechanism, just totally overtook my entire life. And it took my personality away from me. It took a lot of really close friends away from me. It took my family further away from me because they could see that I was struggling, but I couldn't tell them why I was struggling because I didn't even know, because I was just so numb. For me, I was also going through an eating disorder, and the two were really linked. Like, a lot of people think like, oh, if you smoke, you'll eat. And that's true. But when you smoke a lot, you also lose hunger. And so it was like a way for me to starve off my hunger, literally. And so those two things are really interlaced for me. And really that second year it was extremely, extremely challenging. And I am grateful that I did have a slight foundation built in my yoga practice. So I would get to the studio maybe once a week. And even if sometimes I would show up and be stoned, it's like I would sometimes see this little glimmer of hope of like what I could feel like if I was sober, you know? And normally that was like by the end of the class, I had like sweat everything out. My high had worn off, but I would see these glimmers of what it could be like. And that was just the beginning. For me, my story isn't one of like, on this day I woke up and I stopped smoking and I never have since. It's been a lot of back and forth. My identity was really wrapped up in smoking. I'm sure you can relate to that, you know, as someone who goes out and parties and drinks a lot. It's like, that's almost who you become. And so I knew myself as being the pothead. My friends knew me as being the pothead. And so even if I knew that I didn't want to smoke, it was almost easier just to say yes, because that's what everybody expected of me. And that's what I expected of me, because that's the only Sophie I knew at the time. And so for a long, long time, it was easier to say yes than it was to say no. And for me, what ended up happening, there was a lot of on and off. So pretty much from my third year in university to my fifth year, there was a lot of back and forth. Like, I'm sober and now I'm back. I'm smoking and now I'm not. I'm up and then I'm down. And it was a really long journey for me. And it took going home and having the support of my family who, did not allow me to smoke weed in their house. And I had to go home and almost close myself off from my friends and not my family, my friends for a little while, just so I could like get my 2 feet on the ground and be like, okay, this is who I am without weed, and this is who I want to be. But I actually am not strong enough to go out to a party and to say no yet. So I like had to close myself off for a little while. And really one of the greatest blessings of my life was reconnecting with my boyfriend, who has a very similar story to me. But when we met, it was really important to him that he was not with somebody who was drinking heavily or doing any kind of drugs. And I found myself just in this position where I was like, okay, do you want to be in a happy, loving, joyous relationship with somebody else and with yourself? Or do you want to stay in the thralls of your addiction for who knows how long? And I'm really grateful that he, in a way, encouraged me to make that choice. And being with him has been so supportive. And now I'm in a place where it's easier to say no than it is to say yes. And that took a long time, but I know now who I am without weed. And that took like years. That took a long time to figure out. I feel like I'm just stepping into who I am without it. And now it's just so much easier for me to say no, because I know what's at risk if I say yes. Like, I'm not one of those people who can dabble lightly. Like, I'm just not. And I respect that some people are. But for me, like, it has to be a no, because if it's not a no, it's a yes. And then that one time yes turns into a yes all the time. And it's a really dangerous cycle. So that's kind of the overview of my addiction that really played out over the last 10 years, and I can say now that since I've been with Matt, I've been sober. And so we've been together for 4 years, and there's been a slip up here and there, but not for a long time. And I feel really grateful just to have my 2 feet on the earth, and know who I am and be really confident that I'm not going to fall back and slip back into that place that I was in before.
Oh, that's amazing. 4 years. That's huge.
Yeah. You know what? It really is like, I don't think that I would have any of what I have now if I was still stuck in that. I definitely wouldn't have my relationship, which is one of the most precious parts of my entire life. I can say for certain I wouldn't have that. I wouldn't have the job that I have now. I was thinking, like, when I first got this job 2 years ago, I was thinking, like, because we work from home, I've always worked from home even before the pandemic, like, I wouldn't have been able to trust myself to not get up in the morning and smoke, right? Like, I would have totally wasted away my entire career. And so, yeah, it's been amazing for me to see just the blessings that have come through since letting that behavior go.
Yeah. And I enjoyed listening to that because it's like the behaviors and the tendencies are different, obviously. Like there's things that I can't relate to, like, you know, you talking about waking up in the middle of the night and smoking to sleep. Like that's not a behavior that I had with alcohol. But the general theme, like whether the behavior is different, the theme is the same, which is that it's being used as something to like numb my experience and ultimately just held me back from my potential.
Alcohol, like how you get a hangover from alcohol, the same is true when you smoke. Like you wake up, you feel foggy, you feel lethargic. Like I would get these gnarly headaches. Like you don't get to wake up and enjoy a new day from a clean slate. You're still carrying over the effects of the night before, which is very similar to drinking, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
So I have a question for you about pot and like the yoga culture in Canada, because I feel like I told you I never really got into pot. I did smoke it a few times probably in high school, and always it was in the context of me already being drunk. And then I just had a horrible experience. And so it was never for me, but I do remember like my friends would sometimes smoke before coming to a class. And I'm wondering, like, is that a big part of Canadian yoga culture?
Such a great question. Ever since weed has become legalized, definitely. Like you see it, it's like the blaze and yoga. And I have mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, I think if that's what it's going to take to get somebody in the door, you know, a joint before, or there's a lot of like the beer and yoga classes. If that's what it's going to take to get somebody to show up to yoga, okay, you know, because I think that what brings people to yoga isn't what makes them stay. So oftentimes people come to yoga because they're like, I want to be fit, right? And they don't end up staying necessarily because they want to be fit. There's a million different ways you can be fit. They stay because of the mental benefits that they get from it. And I think that the same can be true for when we see that intersection of weed and yoga. If people are coming to yoga for the first time and the only reason why they're coming is because they can get high first, it's like, all right, you know, that's cool. It's getting your foot in the door. On the other hand, you know, I think where I'm at personally in my practice and in my teaching, it's to become more intimate with what is true, you know, so to become more intimate with the present moment. Like that's my goal as a practitioner and as a teacher of yoga. And might be a little controversial for some, but I just don't think it's possible to be present or to be intimate with what is true if you're high or if you're drunk. And so I'll explain that a little bit more. You know, I think that when you're high or you're drunk, it's like you have a filter on, right? It's like an Instagram filter. And so what you're experiencing may be true to you, right? But you're seeing through the lens of being drunk or of being high. You're not seeing through the lens of being sober and being clear. Mm-hmm. So for example, if I'm stoned and I'm in my parents' house and my truth is that I'm really paranoid because I think my mom knows that I'm high and I'm going to get in trouble. So yes, that's my truth. But the greater truth is that my mom might just be downstairs watching TV, not at all thinking about me being high. And in fact, you know, my paranoia is the result of the filter and not a result of the facts. But you can't see the facts when you're high or when you're drunk. And so I think it gets really risky when we start to mix yoga with substance use. Because if the goal of yoga, like it is in the 8-limbed path of yoga, is full enlightenment, full immersion with what is true, I just don't know if you can get there while drinking and smoking. I couldn't get there, and maybe if you do get there, it might be a false sense of enlightenment or full immersion into the truth. So I feel two ways about it. And the other thing that I want to touch on where it gets tricky, especially with pot, is that a lot of people use pot as medicine, and I really don't want to discount that, because I think that there is a place for pot as medicine. If somebody is, for example, quite sick with cancer or struggles with chronic pain, I think that pot can be helpful. It's been proven to be helpful. But what's important is, like, in Ayurveda, which is the sister science of yoga, any medicine can become a poison. And what makes a medicine a poison is the dosage, right? So if you're saying that pot's your medicine, but you can't do anything without pot, then maybe you need to rethink it, because maybe your medicine is actually turned into a poison and is keeping you trapped rather than making you more free, right? And then if we're looking at pot as being a medicine, I think that we also need to really consider that Western dominant culture has this tendency to take from less dominant culture, right? So there are so many lineages that use cannabis as plant medicine. But what's really different about using marijuana as plant medicine and using marijuana to numb is the way in which you interact with it. And plant medicine 101, as I'm just beginning to learn about, is you ask the plant for permission, and you have to be really humble to ask a plant for permission. You also need to be willing to listen and be willing to hear. And so I just ask anyone who smokes, like, when's the last time you've asked the plant permission, right? And given the plant enough time to communicate with you. And I know that might sound a little bit out there, but let's make it a little bit more organic for people. So if you forage mushrooms, foraging 101 is you look around and you see, okay, am I taking the last mushroom here? Is there enough opportunity for this mushroom to regrow and repopulate? And also, does this mushroom want me to take it? And there will be a knowing in yourself. And so a few years ago, this was probably 2 or 3 years ago, I hadn't been smoking for a while. And I thought, maybe I'm at a place where I can engage with cannabis in a therapeutic way. And so, I was taking a bath, and I had been doing some research around plant medicine, and I asked the plant, I said, okay, if I'm in a place where I can use this plant in a therapeutic and medicinal way, I don't know if I'm saying that word right, then send me a message that I cannot deny, like one that I will so clearly understand as a yes or a no. And that night I went to bed, and I have a pretty active dream life, which I never got to experience when I was high, because it totally cuts you off from your REM cycle. So I do enjoy dreaming. And I woke up in the middle of the night and just like gasped. I was like, and it felt like all the air had been taken out of my lungs. And in that moment, I knew, I was like, my constitution is not meant to engage with this plant medicine. And quite frankly, this plant spirit is probably really upset with me based off of the way that I've interacted with it in the past. And I haven't felt called to work with the plant again since, so I haven't interacted with it. But I think that would be helpful for anybody who is smoking and wants to approach it from a therapeutic lens, is just to ask permission, and you can even do that with alcohol. It's like, I'm not entirely sober from alcohol. So when I drink, I ask myself, like, do I need this drink? And what part of me needs this drink? Is it the sad, angry, anxious part of me that needs this drink? Or is it the joyful, grounded, stable Sophie that needs this drink? Right? And I try to choose If I know that I want to drink because I'm really quite anxious, then I'm not going to do it. But am I going to have a glass of champagne, perhaps, so I can enjoy the moment with family and friends? And I don't have a history of abusing alcohol the same way I do pot. But you have to ask for permission, and I think that's really quite important.
Wow, that's I've actually never heard that before. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of the work that, like, what I'm trying to highlight, I guess, is all of these Indigenous peoples, First Nations people that are engaging with marijuana in a therapeutic way. They're asking for permission, and they respect when the plant says no, and they're courageous and brave enough to ask for permission in the first place. And if you think that it's just like complete woo-woo, that's okay, but I implore you to do a little bit of research about plant medicine and educate yourself about where these plants come from. And we're not the first people, dominant Western society, to smoke pot. So I think it's important just to, know where things come from, for sure.
So you kind of touched on this earlier, but what were the main things that made you want to stop smoking?
Yeah, I think the main thing was that, like, I didn't know who I was. I didn't have a personality. I really am quite an outgoing, outspoken individual. But when I was high all the time, I was just so introverted, so anxious, so closed off. I didn't want to go places. I didn't want to see people. I would only hang out with other people who would smoke. I really wanted to evolve past the place that I was, but I knew that wouldn't be possible if I continued to smoke and I continued to stay, in the grips of my eating disorder, which, as I explained, was really intertwined. I wanted to be a good yoga teacher. I wanted to be a good yoga practitioner. And I felt like a phony, if I was showing up to class. I never would show up to class to teach high. But if I ever, before I became a teacher, if I would ever show up to practice high, there was just this knowing, very similar to what you said about this knowing that I wanted to step into this role of being a yoga teacher. There was a knowing that I couldn't get there unless I let this other thing go. I mean, also with any addiction, there comes lying. I would find myself lying to my family and my friends and my coworkers, and that doesn't feel good. It's also really expensive. It's a really expensive habit to have, and ultimately I just wanted more for myself. I knew that I was keeping myself really small by staying in those behaviors. So I knew that I wanted more. And it was like I said before, one little step forward at a time for me. Sometimes 1 step forward, 5 steps back, 10 steps forward, 2 steps back. But each day it really did get a little bit easier. Every single day where it was okay, I didn't smoke. The next day it was easier to smoke because I didn't smoke the day before, and so on and so forth. And now here I am 4 years into it, and I don't think about it. People are smoking around me and I'm it's not even an option I consider for myself. I don't even think, I'm just I just don't do that. I just don't do that. So it's not a choice. It's not a question, right?
Yeah. Eliminating question. That's something I say often.
Yeah.
What were the challenges of quitting when you did quit?
Oh yeah. That's a great question. For me, the main challenges of quitting were sleep. Anybody who has tried to quit smoking weed and has smoked a lot of weed knows that it's going to be hard to sleep for at least the first week. Appetite loss and irritability. Wow, was I a crusty person? I can remember this one trip that I went on with my family out west, and I don't even know if I was intending to get free from weed at that time, but I was just forced to be, because I was with just my family. We're in the middle of nowhere, and I was miserable the whole time. I think truthfully that it was the 3 main things was sleep, irritability, and lack of appetite. And I actually can't remember how long it takes for cannabis to get out of your system, but it's quite some time. It stays in your bloodstream for quite some time. So I would say that I didn't really begin to feel like, myself or who I would become, probably at least until 2 months of not smoking, where I just really could, feel a shift, like in my foundation, a shift, and in my mental patterning, right? Like the neural pathways that I had, where it was like you get up and you smoke, you do this thing, and then you smoke before you eat. Like I had to break that every single day. But like I said, I'm so grateful that I have the support of my family, and I don't know that they knew it at the time. I didn't explicitly tell them, but I'm sure they could tell something was up,
Yeah.
So just to have their love and support and to be in a safe space was the most important thing for me.
Did they know, when you say that, like, did they know how much you were smoking, or you mean they just didn't know how much of a battle it was for you?
They definitely didn't know how much I was smoking, but they knew that I was smoking because it's a thing. It's like, you think you're tricking people. You're like, oh, I'm just going to pretend like I'm not high, or I'm going to pretend like I'm not drunk. But the fact is, my parents have known me my whole life, so they can call bullshit on me pretty quick. So I don't think that they knew the extent of it. It probably would have been quite devastating for them to know the extent of it. And I definitely tried to protect them from the extent of it. But now that I have some distance from it, I feel much more comfortable sharing and talking to them about it. And really all I needed, especially my mom, was just someone to be a rock for me, just to be really strong and steady and consistent. And she was that for sure.
Yeah. So since you quit, how has your life improved? What have been the main benefits?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first off, I sleep a lovely 8 hours a night. Like I really do enjoy deep sleeps, and I don't have any issues with my sleep patterns anymore, which is amazing. I have like a steady, consistent like hunger, but also like hunger for life. I'm more willing to want to try to do new things because I'm not so worried about like, when am I going to be able to smoke next? Like even traveling, like to be able to go away and travel and to like not know when or how you'll be able to fix that desire. I've been able to see so many places and do so many things. And, kind of like I said at the beginning, my entire yoga career has really taken off. And I just don't think that it would have in the same way if I was still really stuck in those low self-worth behaviors. My relationship, like I had commented, my relationships with my parents, like I'm so much more honest. I don't lie to people, I have so much more abundance in every single way. Really, like the ways that my life have improved are just innumerable. And what I was thinking about before I came on is just like how grateful I am that I got a handle on this before the pandemic, because I know that there are a lot of people out there struggling with substance abuse, especially, in North America. There's some really eye-opening studies that are coming out about that. And it's been a hard year for everybody, but add on, an addiction problem, and it makes it a whole lot harder. So my heart really goes out to everybody who's feeling stuck or struggling. And I just want to say that like healing is possible, and it's just like one day at a time. That's how I had to take it. It was just one day at a time. It was never like I'm going to be free from smoking weed forever. Like at first that thought caused me so much anxiety. I used to think that I would be like that old grandmother on the front porch smoking a joint. And it was really hard for me to shift that perception. And so what I did was like, just today, I'm not going to smoke. And then we'll deal with tomorrow. Right. And then every day, like I said before, every day that I didn't smoke, it was easier the next day not to make that choice. And I hear that the same thing is true for a lot of people who quit drinking. It's just like one day at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself. And something I also really want to say is that like, although relapses are like not meant to be undermined in any way, no matter what your substance is, it's like, be gentle and be kind to yourself. Like one step back isn't 1,000 steps back unless you make it that way. right? Like one step back can be one step back, and then it's another step forward tomorrow, and so on and so forth. And so just really giving a lot of grace to myself when I did have those slip ups, for sure. And just knowing that one day at a time, like one moment at a time, I can choose again in the next moment what behavior I'm going to make.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great advice.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about like what you're doing now as a yoga teacher, where you are in your career, and like where people can find you.
Yeah, cool. So I recently moved to Ottawa, Ontario. Like Alex said, I was living in Kingston, Ontario for a few years prior. And so I moved to Ottawa during the pandemic, and I had a really close relationship with the Moto studio in Kingston, and unfortunately, since that studio has closed, and in this last year, there's been such a shift in the yoga world, and my interest has also really shifted to working with people one-on-one. So I currently offer therapeutic private yoga classes. I do everything online right now. And the way that I approach the therapeutic yoga private is that, your body is a house. Your body is the place where you live out your entire life. So I'll take a quick look at your body, see what's going on, see where you're hanging out a lot, see where you're not hanging out a lot, and then just try to help you bring things into equilibrium. And just through the virtue of that practice, a lot comes out about what people might be working through emotionally or physically. And I really, really, really love just being able to give all of my attention to one person. And my attention is really focused and really refined. And I find that I work my best when I'm working with someone one-on-one. I can get kind of distracted when there's a whole lot going on. And then I also do one-on-one mentorships. So I've really taken an interest to working with new yoga teachers, which has just been like such a joy and has kept me so inspired in the last year. I also do some student mentorship programs, and I work really with people of all ages. I love working with women. Yeah, just approaching the practice as a really like holistic thing. So it's not just about like asana and yoga poses. It's also about the way that you're living your life when you're off your yoga mat, right? Because if you practice every day, you're practicing for an hour a day, but what happens in the next 23 hours, right? That matters just as much as the 1 hour that you're on your mat. So I'm doing that. I still do teacher trainings with Moto Yoga, which is amazing and is just like such a joy. I love, love, love working with that team, such inspiring human beings. And fingers crossed, I'll be teaching publicly in Ottawa, maybe sometime this year. We'll have to see. But yeah, that's me. That's what I'm up to.
Awesome. And I'll put your website link in like the episode bio. So if anyone wants to check out Sophie's website or get in touch with her, you can find her on that link.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I just want to say that I think the work that you are doing is so needed, especially right now. Like I know the Mindful Life has just become 1 year, and it's like, what a year it's been, right? And like what a difficult year, but what a remarkable year to bring this forward into the world. And yeah, just to encourage people to make healthy choices for themselves. So big congratulations to you and to your entire team. I know how hard you work, and it's been so amazing to see it all unfold.
Oh, thank you. All right, I have one more quick thing before we wrap this up. Do you want to do a lightning round of either or?
Yes, I love a lightning round. I'm so excited.
So I'm going to give you 2 things and you just have to pick which one. Okay. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Netflix or YouTube?
Netflix. Although I'm pretty into YouTube right now. It's like just happening for me. I'm just starting to get it. But Netflix is like the backbone of my household in terms of television. So Netflix.
Okay. Phone call or text?
I want to say FaceTime. That's my jam.
Yes. Yeah, that should be an option too.
Yeah.
Okay. Waffles or pancakes?
I really love a waffle, but we have pancakes more often, but I love a waffle more. So I'm saying waffle.
Okay. Facebook or Instagram?
Instagram.
Okay. Ice cream cones or snow cones?
Ice cream cones.
Okay. Mac or PC?
Mac.
Yes, obviously.
I just got a new phone and I don't know how to use it. It's wild, the technology.
Is it an iPhone?
Yeah, I got
I think I saw this. You had like an iPhone 6 or something, right?
I had an iPhone 6 and I had it since 2016. And this weekend I got a new phone and it's like mind blown. I don't know how to use it. It's crazy.
That's impressive how long you kept it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. One more. Cake or pie?
Matt's mom makes like the best pie in the world, so I'm gonna go and say pie.
What kind of pie?
She makes a pie for every season. It's like, okay, we got strawberry pie, we have potato pie, we have meat pie, we have it's just a pie for everything.
Wow.
She's really expanded the possibilities of pie for me.
Oh, yeah. Well, when I'm back to Canada, I'll have to come down for a pie.
Yes, of course. I'd love to have you for a pie.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie. This was an amazing episode. Truly just brought a new kind of perspective and a fresh conversation onto the show. So I really appreciate you coming on.
I'm so glad. It was so awesome to connect with you in this way. And if anybody has any questions about anything, reach out. And kind of my last little disclaimer that I want to say is that, this is my story and it's my truth. And if it doesn't resonate with you, that's okay. But the one thing that I'll say is that if this has sparked something in you, just to lift a mirror up to that and just to take a closer look, right, at what that might mean about what's going inside of yourself. And like I said before, it's one day at a time, and just be gentle and kind to yourself. And, healing happens when it happens. We can't rush the process.
Awesome words to end on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Soph. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Soon.
Bye.
Bye.